Hello, my name is Carl Niji and I'm what's known as a Davis facilitator. Today what I'd like to talk about is a topic that comes up in my office and on the phone almost every single day. Whenever I talk with somebody, it comes up again and again, and it happens to nearly everybody who I know who is introduced to Ron's work and the Davis method. Now, in the last video number 29, I discussed Ron's big statement, or Ron's bold statement, about what he discovered about his own dyslexia and his own autism and the difficulties that he was having. I would watch that video as a precursor to this one. Well, if you have watched that video, this thing that I'd like to discuss probably happened to you, or at least partially happened to you. And what I would like to talk about today is basically something that happens to all human beings when we really see or experience something new for the first time. And it's what's known as cognitive dissonance. Now, I always pronounce this one a little bit wrong, so it's cognitive dissonance and the Davis method. And the reason I wanted to discuss this is I think it's a very important idea for people to understand. What Ron is saying about his own dyslexia and his own autism is a very big statement. It's very bold. And essentially what we're saying is that what Ron is saying, what I'm saying, what every facilitator is saying by extension, is that in the 1980s, a very mild-mannered, severely dyslexic, severely autistic engineer discovered what was causing his major learning problems of dyslexia and autism. And he explored this idea in the 1980s and then wrote a book called The Gift of Dyslexia, I think in '94. That is an extraordinary thing when you pull back and look at it objectively, given what everyone else is saying on this topic. So we're going to look at what everyone else is saying about this topic and why the Davis method actually causes cognitive dissonance in people. And I remember when it happened to me, I remember first encountering it, and it happened several times when I was actually training as a facilitator. There was this moment when I thought to myself, my God, if Ron is correct, and he's really cracked this nut of what everyone else is calling a learning disability, then that means that everybody else, by definition, is either only partially correct or completely incorrect. And that being incorrect would come across and feel wrong, right? They would be judged as being wrong, I suppose, or they might think that they were wrong. And that wrong idea would be very difficult for people to deal with. And I actually saw this in my training with a group of teachers who, Ron's work, as we were being trained and as we were going through these workshops, Ron's work was really challenging the way they thought things what were and how they thought people learned to read. And as a result, I think it was 4 or 5 of these teachers, they all dropped out and didn't continue training. And at the time, I remember thinking it was kind of interesting and going, that's interesting. I wonder why that's happening. Then when I actually did a program for myself 16 years ago or so, I remember asking my facilitator, who I was doing a program with, I said, well, why isn't this in the school system? Why don't people know about this? And she said at the time, she said, well, people do Davis once they've tried everything else and those other things have failed, then they'll do Davis. And I thought that was really interesting. Now, at the time, I didn't know about cognitive dissonance and I didn't really understand what it was. As I trained as a facilitator and as I began to work with clients, I began to see it more and more and more. And I thought, and it really almost got into a tug of war in the beginning when I was in the early stages of being a facilitator and trying to promote Ron's work. Then I actually quite early on, luckily, found out about this thing that psychology calls cognitive dissonance. So let's actually, what is that? Well, simply put, we all have an internal belief system, and that internal belief system is made up through our experience as we grow up and the beliefs that we are told about things like religion and money and history and politics, and these beliefs that go into us, some of them are from our own experience directly and some of them are handed to us. What this does then is this gives us a world view of how things are, or how we believe that they are. So cognitive dissonance happens when something new arrives and we're seeing it for the first time. We haven't experienced this thing. Now, if it's something small and not too complicated, we might go, oh, well, I can incorporate that into my worldview. However, if it is something very big and very large and a big idea, we really have one of two options. And this big new idea challenges our worldview. And this is where cognitive dissonance comes into its own. If our worldview agrees with the new thing, the big new idea, then we go, great, and it just continue on. If it challenges it though, or worse still, even contradicts it, we have one of two things we can do. One is to change our worldview and incorporate this new thing into our belief system. But that's actually really quite difficult to do. The easy thing to do is to just discount it and say, it's not relevant. That's not true. I don't believe it. No, no, no. Yes, but it should be different. And you can always tell if somebody is on the edge of cognitive dissonance, I've realized, if they are either yes butting the conversation a lot, or if they are shoulding the conversation a lot. What they're really saying is, I don't like what I'm hearing, or I think it should be some other way that it isn't. And when we look at what is being said, and this is the important piece, so a lot of people will understand what cognitive dissonance is. They've experienced it, we all have, and we probably all will again. But what people fail to understand is why when it comes to Ron's work. So that's what I'd like to talk a little bit more about. When we listen to what the authority figures of education, psychology, and neurology are saying, it's not a pleasant picture. It's, if you could condense it down, you have been listening to it. If you're my age and you're on the spectrum in some way, either dyslexic or autistic or ADHD, or you have some of these difficulties and you have one of these learning labels, as I like to call them, then you have had a steady drip, drip, drip in your ear of, you can't do this, you can't do this, this is hard for you. In my case, it was, you can't read easily, you can't spell easy, you have bad time management, you're not understanding how the world works. And if you're a parent listening to this, then you've been watching your child not being able to do certain things. If you're an educator or a professional in this field looking at this, then you're looking at all the things that people with learning labels find hard to do. And what is a learning label? Well, in my case, I had the learning label of dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia. If it was just coming into, but I was never diagnosed with ADHD, but I would have been diagnosed with ADHD at the time if it had been a thing when I was young enough. And really what that learning label is people are looking at all the things you can't do this, can't do this, can't do this, can't do this, right? And then they're giving those symptoms a name, and then they are labeling that as dyslexia or ADHD or dysgraphia, and then so one professional can talk to another. But dyslexia isn't a thing like this pencil or pen is a thing. This pencil or pen is an actual object I can touch. But dyslexia is a way of thinking. It's a mind like mine, a brain like mine, produces a type of thinking that produces, actually it's the other way around, isn't it? My brain produces a type of consciousness, and that consciousness produces a type of thinking, and that type of thinking has great difficulty with the skill set that we call literacy. So when somebody like me has that difficulty, we will call that dyslexia. There are over, I think there's somewhere around 70 learning disability labels in the DSM. And if you reduced all of what is being said by the authority figures in the room, it basically boils down to this. We do not know what is causing these disorders, is how medicine would talk about it. If it's the authority figure of education, it's called a disability. We don't know what's causing these disorders or these disabilities. What we have is not that effective as a solution. What we used to think of about 100 years ago, we used to think that this was either a damage to your brain or difference to your brain. And we didn't really know. The damage part comes from about 100 years ago. And if we listen to modern day neurology is saying, well, we don't know what's causing these problems. It doesn't look like damage. The new model is it just looks like difference, but we don't know what's causing that difference. What we have as an effective solution is for education, it's traditional methods that we can statistically show just really don't work very well for people like me, regardless of whether they're calling it evidence-based or science-based. It actually, statistically, we can show there's a very high failure rate with those methods in education. Where it comes to medicine, we essentially have medication if you're hyperactive and your hyperactivity is basically causing a problem in school or in your life. We have medication to help to suppress that. And there are some other therapies like speech therapies and these sorts of things, and they may help as well. However, in the big picture, if you look at it long enough, they don't really overcome the problems that we're having. They're more of a suppressant than anything. And if we really look at what is being said here, we don't know what is causing the dyslexia, the dysgraphia, dyspraxias, and the solutions aren't that effective, and good luck. And we're going to talk about you as either being disordered or a disability. This is not a good thing, right? What's talked about a lot is all of the negatives. Now, no one ever outrightly says this to you directly like I am. What happens is it gets sort of dripped in to your awareness. You might read a book, you might get a psych ed assessment, you might talk to a psychologist, you might talk to a friend or a colleague, you might watch a documentary, you might go searching on YouTube, and you hear this drip, drip, drip of disorder, disability, disorder, disability. The language of medicine is very cold, because it's very clinical, and this translates into kind of scary, particularly with the word disorder. When we look at what the word disorder actually means technically, it's basically a very long way of saying we don't know what's causing it. So really what we find is that education is waiting for psychology to come up with an answer, and psychology is waiting for neurology to come up for an answer, and neurology is saying we don't know what's causing it. It just looks like difference, but we don't know what's causing that difference. And good luck. That is a pretty negative picture. And even if we go online or if we listen to people about the positive sides of dyslexia, there's a lot of people talking about the giftedness of dyslexics and people who are on the spectrum, and we look at famous dyslexics. That almost is also a negative because, again, they're not talking about what is causing these problems. When a person fully understands something, so if we fully understand what something is, we can answer the questions of what, when, how, why, and who. And we can fully answer the questions that people have about that condition. When we look at Ron's work and the 3 books that Ron has written on this subject, we understand it, we can begin to see it is a complete understanding. It's not it's a disorder of your brain and good luck. In this, the authority figure, when you look closely and you push hard for answers, you essentially get a list of the negative things you can't be done or can't do, and then it's a disorder of your brain. You think differently, and when you say, well, what's causing those problems, eventually the more honest ones quite quickly will say, we don't know. And people who don't like answering that question will usually deflect it. And that, what I've just said, that took me 20 years to figure out. And since I've been a Davis facilitator, I've noticed that I can now articulate it. And what I've noticed is there's a reluctance to understand Davis and do Davis and really dive down deep into the Davis method because of this very negative story that's been told and a belief system that people have. Now, I did a video some time ago called The Paradigm of a Learning Disability, And really, that's what we've been exposed to. I've been telling a story, I suppose, or a narrative, but really it's actually a paradigm that is very fixed in people's thinking, and they find it very difficult to think outside of it. And you, if you are watching this video, you've been exposed to this paradigm. And it takes quite a lot to shift it over to something different, to be open-minded to, well, maybe there actually really is a solution to these problems that I've been having. And that unto itself is such a bold thing to say that it causes cognitive dissonance. So everything that I've just been saying will actually trigger cognitive dissonance in people because of how it's been presented to us in society for the last, well, all of my lifetime. I think what happens is people take a very quick look at Davis. They maybe watch a short soundbite. They may even read the book. But the problem with Davis, the fundamental problem with it is like my grandmother used to say, the proof is in the pudding, dear. You actually have to taste it. You actually have to do it. And if you're sat on the sidelines saying, I'm not sure whether that's going to work, maybe, maybe not, that's actually the right answer. You don't know, and you won't know unless you actually do it. And what I've found is that parents are really the gatekeepers to their children. Their job is to protect their children. But because they've been listening to this authority figures for decades, potentially, they go with what the authority figure is saying. And no one's actually explained to them exactly what the authority figure is saying on a long enough timeline. And it's not good news on a long enough timeline. If you have very mild learning difficulties, then yes, the school system will force you through. You can force yourself to learn to read at grade level. It may be easier for you. You can force yourself to concentrate if you have mild difficulties. I never usually see mild in my office. By the time people are getting to my office, it's pretty moderate to severe. So I think that this happens. It happens a lot. It needs to be discussed more. People are not discussing it. They just sort of tend to fall into these two camps of either believing what the authority figure says and just becoming apathetic to it and eventually sort of giving up if they can't find a solution. Because in this narrative, it's very negative and people try and fail and try and fail and try and fail. Parents do, teachers do. And unless you're living this life, unless it is your actual life, it's actually not the problem of anybody else other than the person that is dyslexic or ADD or whatever label you might have. So I think it's important to discuss it and sort of put it out in the open. I want to do this as a Davis facilitator. I like to do this as somebody who's dyslexic. I can answer the very awkward questions of what, when, how, why, and who. The who is you, your child, or the person you're trying to help if you're a professional. The what, when, how, and why is described in Ron's books, and you get to fully understand those questions when you do a Davis program. If you don't do a Davis program as somebody who has one of these learning labels, you will never answer those questions, in my opinion. From what I've seen, and I'm 57 and I've been working with these methods for a very long time, the only person that ever really has answered those questions of what, when, how, why, and who is Ron Davis and the Davis method. Everyone else in this narrative or this paradigm skirts past those questions. They either avoid the question because they don't have an answer, or they'll say it's a disorder of your brain or a disability and then keep on going. And I think that that is somewhat disingenuous. I think it's inaccurate. And I think it needs to be put out there, talked about. So that's why I'm making this video. Regardless of what I've said, what I find very interesting is quite a lot of people will take a quick cursory look at Davis and then they'll move on because it doesn't fit this paradigm that they've been exposed to. And when we really look at what Ron is saying, Ron is actually contradicting a lot of what is said in this paradigm. He is basically saying, you fundamentally, there is nothing wrong with you. Fundamentally, you are not damaged or broken. You do not have a disorder. You are not disabled. There is something that you're doing that we can help show you how to stop doing, and then you actually can do the things that you've been finding very difficult to do. That is different from what you've heard before. It's a different paradigm. It's a paradigm shift. So if you're listening to this and you would like to find out more about what, when, how, why, you can get help for yourself or a loved one, or if you'd like to take training as a facilitator, if you're a professional and you want to take training so you can use this in your practice, you can take this into the school system, then basically go to the links in the description, reach out, talk to a Davis facilitator, and you will get those questions answered. Anyway, that's it for today. Cognitive dissonance and the Davis method. I would encourage you to take a good, long, hard look. If you have any type of learning label, take a long, hard look at the Davis method and how it can help you. That's it for now.